The scream wasn't hers. It was her brother's, high, choking, the sound a rabbit makes when the snare cinches tight. It cut across the courthouse yard and bounced off the brick hotel and the feed store, came back thinner, meaner. A winter sun hung low like a coin no one could spend. Wind pushed a grit of old snow along the boardwalk. The crowd leaned in for spectacle, the way men lean into a fresh pie. Jesse Cade was 2 steps from the hitch rail when he saw the boy's face purple under the rope. 18, maybe, freckles under the dirt, boots too big for his bones. The marshal's hand rode the lever of the trap as if it were a church bell. Beside him, Silas Vane sat a black stallion and smiled without showing teeth. Vane's coat was city black, his hat city flat, his eyes an accountant's, counting cattle, acres, sins he'd already made change for. "Please," the girl said. Not a cry, a statement. She stepped through the men like wheat through a split sack, hair pinned at the nape, hands empty and open, as if she'd been born to carry water, not trouble. "Marshal Hogue, you know Eli didn't take that payroll. Let me talk to the man who lost it." "You're talking to him," Vane said, that almost smile deepening. And he did. She faced him. Her eyes were the color of the river mud after a storm, dark, swirling, holding pieces of 100 miles upstream. "You own half the county, Mr. Vane. Why would you care about a leather bag on a mule?" She swallowed. "Hang me if you need someone to hang. Leave my brother." "What a thought," Vane said, pleased by his own pity. "But the county doesn't hang girls. It educates them." He tipped his hat toward his ranch hands, sat straight as a nail. "You want him to live? Come with me, today, quietly. Be agreeable. Make me some peace in my evenings instead of this noise. I'll tell Hogue to turn the boy loose, with a lecture and a scar only inside his neck." Jessie felt the yard tilt. The girl didn't move for half a breath. Then she reached back, placed both hands over her brother's, which were tied behind his spine. Her touch stilled him. "Don't fight it," she whispered where only rope could hear. "Breathe. I'll fix it." "Mara," the boy rasped. "No." She shook her head once and stepped away, leaving her hands pressed to the air where his wrists had been, as if the shape of him would hold there a second longer. She faced Vane and crooked one finger toward herself. "Then take me," she said. "Eli walks." Hogue pushed his hat back and hawked into the dust, as if to spit out his conscience. "Silas!" "Quiet the yard," Vane cut, never looking away from the girl. Jesse felt something heavy grow inside his chest, like a storm building a wall out of heat and horizon. He had seen trades like this in border towns when the law forgot its own handwriting. They ended quick, or they didn't end. Both were bad. He could already feel the old ache wake in his leg, where a 44 had signed its name 5 years before. He always hurt when a wrong choice prepared to happen. The girl extended her wrists, palms up. "We shake on it, or you cut him down first. Choose." Vane enjoyed the performance. He signaled to Hogue with 2 fingers. The marshal swore and lifted the noose off Eli's neck, the way a man removes a snake from a fence post, angry at the snake for existing, angry at himself for being careful. The boy collapsed to his knees, choking. Mara didn't turn to look. She simply kept her arms out, a little tremor starting in her elbows. "Name?" Vane asked. "Mara Pike." "You know what you're offering?" "Yes," she said. "Me." Something in Jesse broke its halter. "Hold," he called, stepping forward, voice low and flat as the river in August. "Mr. Vane, you forget one thing." Vane's stallion rolled an eye. Vane turned that accountant gaze on Jesse. "Do I?" "You're buying trouble on installment," Jesse said. "That girl is going to cost you everything you call comfort." "And you're going to stop me?" Vane asked, amused. Jesse tipped his hat back just enough that his scar caught the weak light. A pale crescent along his temple, the kind men didn't ask about unless they wanted to step around back and see if they could add a matching one. "I'm going to witness you, and I'm going to make sure there's a world left to tell what you did." Vane's attention returned to Mara. "I prefer quieter men. I prefer honest ones," she said. "But here we are." Vane signaled again. The rope thunked loose from the beam, frayed end swinging. Hogue cut Eli's wrists. The boy stumbled into his sister like he wanted to wrap himself in her and disappear. She put a hand on his cheek and pushed him gently toward the schoolhouse steps where the crowd thinned. Jesse didn't hear what she whispered into his hair. He didn't need to. It was the sound women made when they sent a man into a storm with half their own breath in his lungs. She went to Vane. Every step looked like it cost her more than the last one, but her spine never bent. When she got near enough to touch his boot, she didn't. She held the space like a thin glass. "Say it," she told him. "Say Eli Pike walks free and clear." Vane enjoyed the taste of words when they hurt someone. "Eli Pike walks free and clear?" Jesse watched Hoag's face. The marshal looked like a man who'd left his wife on wash day to drink with teamsters, and had just remembered what the look in her eyes would be when he came home. He still didn't speak. Vane turned in the saddle and offered his hand to Mara, as if this were a dance at the Grange. She didn't take it. She climbed up on his wagon behind him and gripped the rail until her knuckles went white. The yard exhaled. Men drifted. A boy kicked something that didn't fight back. Eli wheezed and cried, and then swallowed it so dizzy it made Jesse's teeth ache to watch. Hoag adjusted his badge like it was cutting into him. Jesse moved through the thinning crowd, each step measured so he wouldn't run. He came up beside Eli and crouched until his eyes were level with the boys. "You ride?" he asked. Eli wiped his nose with his shoulder and nodded. "You got a good horse?" "Good enough." "Good," Jesse said. "Ride south when the church bell rings sundown. Take the river road. Don't look at the vein spread when you pass it, or you'll ride into a post." "Why?" Eli managed. "Because your sister just bought you hours," Jesse said. "Don't spend them standing still." He straightened and looked at the wagon as it turned down Main Street. Vane, tall and pleased. Mara, a thin line of dark against the winter. Jesse did the math. He didn't like the sum. He didn't know deputies had already ridden ahead to make sure the ranch gate shut behind her. 2 days became a week, and the week became a rack pulled tight. The Vane place sat out where the land forgot to be kind. Greasewood flats, a creek that never answered you twice, a wind that learned your name and called it wrong just to watch you flinch. Jesse kept his watch under the mesquite line across from the main house, a pair of field glasses he'd won off a drunk surveyor cold against his face. He slept in the gullies, woke smelling like wet clay and sage. He learned the rhythms. A cook fire at dawn, men's laughter that sounded like knives, the thud of a heavy door, late and later. He saw Mara twice under the porch light, carrying a bucket on each hip. She moved like she had learned how to take up less space than a shadow. Trust doesn't grow in soil like that. It's forced. It learns to call thirst its friend. Jesse brought what trust he could. He rode into town midweek and bought ribbon and a tin of cough powder and a sack of oatmeal. He dropped them by the Pike place when the dark was kind, a soft thump on the porch near where a hand could find it, without a man waking thinking he'd been robbed. He left a note the third night, not a plan, tide charts. "Sage washes scent," he wrote. "Boil 2 fistfuls, rinse your hair, men forget where you were." On the 5th night he saw her stumble when she lifted a bucket. It wasn't heavy, something inside her was. On the 6th, 2 riders brought a crate of wine to the house. On the 7th, a dressmaker's parcel arrived from town. He watched Vane's hand light on Mara's shoulder as he passed her and saw the way her body stayed still by force of will, the way a frightened horse chooses not to rear because the corral is too small to survive that mistake. Jesse was not a man given to quick moves when long ones work. But there are nights that ask a man to spend every coin he's got. He came out of the mesquite like a shadow, learning what light can do. He crossed the yard in the deepest dark between moon and day. He climbed the rear stair to the alley of servants' doors and tapped twice in a rhythm he'd used with scouts in winter. "I'm not wind. I'm not enemy. I'm here." She opened. Bare feet, plain dress, hair braided tight enough to hold her head together. She didn't gasp. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She tipped her face, dragging him inside with her eyes. "You're going to get killed," she said. "Maybe," he answered. "Before or after you?" "After," she said, "if you're useful. That's why I'm here." She listened the way field listens to rain you're not sure will cross the fence. "Eli, Gone south. 5 more days and he'll outpace the story. She closed her eyes and breathed once like a man after a long dive. Thank you. Tell me where you sleep, he said. Tell me where he does. Tell me who drinks and who pretends to. She told him. She told him like a woman who has learned not to waste syllables, like every word was weighted and had to be lifted with both hands. When she ran out of telling, she looked at his mouth as if she had one more thing, and then changed it for a different one. Why did you step in that day? He had a lie ready for last names and reputations, and the man he'd been. He did not use it. I have had a bad education, he said, voice quieter than the room. It taught me that not doing the wrong thing isn't the same as doing the right one. You talk like a preacher who learned to shoot, she said, not mocking. I talk like a man who lost something he meant to protect. The porch boards groaned under a passing boot. She pushed him into a closet, leaned the broom against the door like she'd been born hiding men. The boot steps went by, returned, paused. A hand tried the knob. She spoke before it turned. Sir, Mr. Vane, you asked for the wine to be brought up when you rang, and I have it ready. You haven't rung. Silence. An exhale that sounded dissatisfied with its job. The steps moved on. She opened the door again and put her mouth closer to his ear than any man's mouth had a right to be. Come tomorrow, she said. After dark. I'll leave the back latch lifted. He nodded. Mara, Jessie. Pack only what you can throw to a horse without looking, he said, and tie your hair back with string. Ribbons get you killed at gates. She almost smiled. It hurt to watch. Yes, sir. He went back to the mesquite and drew the kind of breath a man saves for after. The sky was a bruise, learning to heal. A coyote laughed in the wash. Jessie stared at the house a long time and thought of fire and how it likes to take whatever shape the wind asks it to. At dawn, riders went out who weren't on the day's list. The kind of men who paid more attention to fences than to steers. The kind who asked questions at back doors. Jessie saw Hogue with them and understood why he hadn't seen the marshal in town much. The law had moved in where it could drink for free. Someone had told Vane a door had lifted. Someone had told him the wind was learning a woman's name. That evening, the back latch was not lifted. Voices crowded the hall. Jessie counted boots with his eyes because his ears couldn't handle the rage. He waited long enough to learn what patience can do, and then longer, and when he knew longer wouldn't be enough to keep her alive, he angled toward the kitchen and set a rag in lamb fat and let it kiss a candle and tucked it into the woodpile like a prayer he didn't want, answered fast. The fire took like a man takes his last chance. Smoke ran flat under the ceiling, then thick, then honest. Men shouted. A bucket line formed slow, clumsy with whiskey. Doors opened for air and let out fear. Vane stood on the back step and cussed tidy. In that sweet tangle, Jessie saw Mara slip, carrying a trunk no heavier than the space she intended to leave behind. She wore boots. She wore the dressmaker's parcel turned into a walking dress that wouldn't catch. She wore her mouth set in a line no man would move. They ran. The mesquite made room for them, like a friend who forgives you for being late. Horses waited where he'd staked them under stars. He'd chosen ones with good opinions of themselves and no taste for drama. He threw her trunk across his saddle, swung up, pulled her behind, and felt the tremble she had kept from everyone else run through his back like a small earthquake. They made the wash and took it west. The fire behind them did its math on dry boards and old varnish. A sliver of moon cut what it could. The creek bed found their legs and tried to keep them. They let it, because sometimes losing a little is how you get away. At the fence line, a rifle snapped. The round kissed Jessie's hat and took a curl of his hair like it was paying the barber. He ducked, and he felt her duck, and there is a way 2 people move together the first time that tells you what they'll be like on the 5th and the 50th. Left, she breathed. He went left. Another shot barked. His horse bunched and leapt. He put his knee against hers and kept their balance like a dance he hadn't known he could do. You all right? He called. Ask me again in morning. They didn't know Hogue had put 3 men on the south road and 1 on the ridge, and none in the wash because he didn't understand that water dug escape maps into the earth for a reason. They rode until the horses' chests shone in the small light, and the mesquite leaves whispered the way women whisper when they fix each other's hair. They slid into a cut that had been a river before the war and wasn't anything now but memory. They breathed, they listened, they let the night take part of their fear and hold it for them. He built a small fire under a rock, the kind a mountain cat uses to warm his paws. She unwrapped her braid and shook out her hair. He looked away because what a man watches becomes a kind of ownership if he lets it. "Thank you," she said into the dark. "You don't owe me that." "I don't owe you anything," she agreed. "I'm giving it." He nodded where she couldn't see it. He handed her a piece of jerky and a tin of beans that tasted better than anyone's first night free should. When the quiet settled into the soil and their breath learned new shapes, she moved closer to the fire and closer to him, not in the way that asks for touch, but in the way that says, "I am willing to be warm near you." "Why did you come back?" she asked, "when you could have kept walking like everyone else?" He poked the coal and watched the sparks lift like the names of men who died without someone to say them. "Because I know the price of choosing the wrong thing," he said, slow, "and I can't afford it again." The dawn found them wrapped in their coats, shoulders almost touching, the little fire a memory that lived under their boots. He saddled. She tied her hair with string, not ribbon. The world felt like it might allow a few more breaths if no one noticed. They moved before the birds started making suggestions. By noon, Vane's riders had questions. By evening, the questions had spurs. By morning, men on horseback were asking at every homestead from the river to the basalt bluffs if anyone had seen a girl with fire in her. They started at the Pike place. They don't teach you how to be hunted. You learn or you don't. Jesse taught by doing. He gave their horses new names, in case you had to call them in a way that didn't read like fear. He dismounted on stone instead of sand, so Prince would forget where they came from. He cut open his own canteen and threw it where the ground drank greedily, so anyone following would learn that water went wrong here and turn aside for the next windmill. He had lived long enough to remember where the land saved him, even when he didn't deserve it. They slept in the old lava tubes south of the mesa. They slept under a wagon someone had left to die when the axle broke in '73, sleeping to the smell of old pitch and old hopes. They slept in a thicket of salt cedar that held their breath like a friend who knows the sound of your footsteps better than your voice. Between sleeping, they built something. They built. It came in small pieces. The time she held the reins while he stitched a cut on his own forearm, needle slow, thread practicing patience. The time he burned coffee and she laughed, the first sound that made the world turn its head. The day the wind howled so hard they had to lean into it to avoid being pushed back while crossing a ridge. And he put his hand at the small of her back to keep her from tumbling into the arroyo, and then removed it fast as sin after they made the other side. Both of them pretending it had been only a matter of physics. She let him sit close while she braided her hair one night, and he memorized the movement like a prayer. Divide, smooth, cross, keep. She wore his spare coat, even though it hung on her like a story that wasn't hers yet. She took his food without apology. She learned the smell of a man who had made friends with old leather and rain. Trust is a pile of unremarkable moments you find you can't bear to lose. They spoke of Eli in 3 sentences a day. That was enough. They spoke of Vane in none. That was required to stay alive. On the 4th day, a rider found them near the basalt. Jesse heard the hoof on stone, one note, then another, and knew it wasn't an elk pretending to be a horse. He shoved Mara behind a chunk of cooled fire, stepped out with his rifle held like a way to end conversation. The rider came up with both hands out and hat off. He was young and plain and had rope burns healed and new on his palms. His face said he'd seen enough to want to see less. "My name's Tom Reed," he said. "I'd like to be on the correct side of this story." "Which is?" Jesse asked, low. "The one where no one gets bought," Tom said. I keep the shoeing shed in town. Saw you help the boy that day. Saw the girl choose. Saw the marshal swallow something he won't ever cough up." Mara stepped out, and Tom's eyes widened the way a man's eyes widen when he sees a fire still burning where the men who set it swore they'd put it out. "Ma'am," he breathed, like a prayer you don't say in front of people you owe money to. "He following you?" Jessie asked. "Couple of them. I lost them at Three Forks. They ain't smart enough to understand you don't step where grass is still sweating dew at noon." Tom rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "I can take you through the kiln country. There's a woman out there, Leda Finch, who owes me for a horse we brought back from a bad bet. She keeps goats and secrets. You can set a day under her oven, and no one will think to look in a house that smells like bread." Jesse weighed the odds. He had always liked odds that looked like men had kicked them into the dirt and walked off. "Why help?" Mara asked. Tom looked at her like a man who had decided to stop apologizing for being decent. "Because my ma made the same sound you did." They went. Leda Finch lived in a square of mud and miracle, stuck to the side of a hill that had decided to be stubborn. Her oven had a humpback and a temper. She took one look at Mara and one at Jessie and one at the way Tom stood with his hat wrung like a rag and said, "Eat first, lie later." They ate bread so hot it burned their tongues and didn't stop them. Leda watched Mara sleep with her head on Jessie's arm, because a woman can sleep on a rock and call it pillow if her body finally gets to believe the ground won't move under it. Jessie didn't sleep so much as keep watch with his eyes shut. Tom sat the door with a shotgun across his lap, like he'd been practicing for this kindness in his head his whole short life. Afternoon broke into evening. Men rode past. None stopped. The goats kept their opinions to themselves. At dusk, Hogue arrived. He didn't bang. He didn't shout. He stood with his hat in his hand, and his mouth turned down like a farmer staring at a field he'd ruined with his own plough. Leda opened the door with the confidence of a woman who'd fed worse and better men without being surprised by either. "Evening," Hogue said. "Nope," Leda said. "I got questions." "You got answers first?" Hogue looked over her shoulder and saw Jessie rise. He saw Mara get to her knees, hair a storm around her face. He had the sense to look away from the way Jessie's body put itself between the two of them, out of habit that had become conviction. "I came without Vane," Hogue said. "I came without paper. I came because there's a thing you need to know before you hold hands with this man any tighter, Miss Pike." Mara's chin rose. "It's Mrs. Nobody till I tell you otherwise." Hogue nodded, chastened. "Miss Nobody," he said. "This man rode with Vane once." Jessie didn't flinch. Leda's eyebrows climbed into their own kind of sky. Tom shifted on his chair like he'd sat on a burr that asked hard questions. "Say it plain," Mara said. Jessie put his rifle against the wall, empty palms hanging from wrists scarred by ropes that had been used as lessons. "I rode for him 3 years, tracked his strays, sat his payroll, rode guard when he brought his law to places that were poor in their own. I didn't shoot men for him. I watched men get shot and told myself I was a fence post, not the wind. When he ran a family off the river road so he could pull fence up to the willow line, I said I was only there to keep boys from getting hurt." He took a breath that hurt. "That's the worst lie I've ever told, and I have said worse." "Why leave?" Leda asked, kind where other women would have been curious. "One day the boy who opened the gate for us had a blue marble in his pocket. He'd found it in the dust behind the mercantile. He showed it to me like a treasure. Vane took it, joked about taxes, closed his fist, then gave it back, laughing. The boy ran to show his sister. The marble had cracked in his hand. Jessie stared at his own fingers, as if they might still carry the shape of that small mercy turned mean. Something in me understood that day what kind of man I'd made comfortable. Hogue watched the words land. He looked at Mara. "I told you because if you make a choice, I want your eyes open. Vane will say worse. He'll make songs out of it. I'd rather you hear it inside walls that shelter." Mara's mouth went hard and beautiful. She didn't step back. She reached and put her hand flat on Jessie's chest, right over the place where a horse once had kicked him so hard the bone still counted it sometimes. "You watch men do wrong, and told yourself you were only there to keep boys from getting hurt?" She nodded, slow. "I watched a man be mine, and told myself I was only there so my brother wouldn't starve. We both know better now." Jesse let out a breath that sounded like a rope dropping to dirt. His eyes burned, and he didn't hide it. "I will spend the rest of my life paying the interest on what I owe." "Then get to work," she said. Hogue cleared his throat and ruined the moment with duty. "Vane's bringing paper back through town morning after next. He wants to pin theft on Eli again by proxy. He's going to say you stole dresses and a trunk and half his house to turn his education of you into larceny. It's a mess of words that smells like something died. I can slow it. I can't stop it if he gets the judge to sign while the judge is still warm with a city breakfast." "What do you want?" Jesse asked. Hogue worked his hat brim in his hands until it looked like all his bad choices. "I want a town that doesn't spit every time a rich man says he's thirsty. I can't have that yet. I can have you both alive and gone far enough that Vane has to go to the city to hire men to hunt you and gets bored before he remembers your names." Tom looked at Mara as if his throat hurt. "Say the word," he said. "I'll ride distraction. Leda's boy can take you to the old mission where the walls still think they keep people safe. There's a priest there who owes me a debt for fixing the roof with a mule that preferred theology to labor. You can sleep behind stone tonight." Mara looked at Jesse. The look said, "Decide with me." "We run," Jesse said. "We hide when running looks like guilt. We fight when hiding would cost us more." "Good," she said. "I hate choosing alone." Hogue lifted a hand. "I'll take your tracks toward the ridge and make a mess of them. When the night lifts her skirts, you go. And Jesse—" "Marshall!" "Don't get good at this," Hogue said, voice rough. "It'll take parts of you you'll need later." They went at moonrise. Leda put bread and hard cheese and a small vial of something that smelled like the ground after first rain into Mara's palm. "For fear," she said. "You rub it at your throat, and it thinks it's been heard and quiets down." Tom took the ridge with a lantern and sang off-key on purpose so men could follow a map that drew itself in sound. Hogue rode in a patience only real regret can teach. Mara and Jesse moved in the troughs between hills where the earth had learned how to hide from wind and was willing to share. They reached the mission just before the east decided to be honest about light. Stone walls held old saints painted with hands less skilled than their hearts. Father Guillermo was small and wore a look like a mule that had never lost an argument, mostly by refusing to show up for it. He took one look at Mara and one at Jesse and said, "In kitchen, quiet feet. Quiet hearts if you can manage." They slept on sacks of flour. They woke to men in the yard. Not Vane yet. Scouts. The kind of men who like to give orders to dogs to feel how command tasted on their tongues. Jesse put his hand on Mara's shoulder and felt her wake like a deer deciding not to spook. They didn't draw, they didn't move. Father Guillermo's shadow crossed the kitchen doorway and became a door all by itself. "What?" said a voice outside. "Mass," Guillermo answered, bored. "You got 2 strays." "I've got 50 sinners," Guillermo said. "You want names, or you want to stand in a circle and hear what yours sounds like when you say it out loud?" The scout spat. "You tell Vane." "I tell God," Guillermo said, and shut the door. They went past noon. The men grew tired of feeling small. They left to find a fight they might win. In the lean quiet afterward, Jesse touched the edge of Mara's jaw and then thought better, and then thought worst, and touched it again. "You with me?" he asked. She nodded once. That nod was worth more than money in any bank that would let people like them in the door to begin with. They didn't know that Vane was tired of everybody else's patience. They didn't know he'd dragged the judge out of bed and into his buggy and sat him at a desk with paper and his own rules and a clean pen. They did know what choosing felt like now. "We can stay," Mara said. "Pretend the walls are enough." "They're not," Jesse said. "But we can make them buy us time with their age." "How much?" "Not enough," he said. "Then we run again," she said. "And when we run out of running, we make our stand where it will cause the most embarrassment." He grinned, despite the tired. "You talk like a general with small shoes. You talk like a hired gun who wants to be a farmer." "I want to live," he said. As your husband. She stiffened, then softened. The word did that to a woman who had been asked for all the wrong things. Jessie, she said, voice careful, if that's a map you're drawing to get us past a bad bend in the river, fold it back up. It's a promise, he said, to be the door and the quiet after. She looked at the floor until her courage caught up with her. Then yes, she said, when we're not hunted. Or maybe before, if that makes the hunting less successful. He laughed once, a sound that surprised him with how young it felt. You want to make a preacher run his ink before breakfast. Father Guillermo has good ink, she said, and a stubborn pen. They worked while they waited. They packed flour into bags that could be thrown easily. They counted bullets. They studied the yard like a tune and learned where it went high and where it sank. They decided where not to die. Late afternoon, the dust on the road to the mission swelled. Vane rode in with 6 men and a badge or two like a necklace to wear for company. He looked at the mission as if architecture were an affront. He looked at Guillermo like the idea of a vow made him itch. Father, Vane said. Silas, Guillermo said, respectful as a brick. I come with law. You come with paper. Which is law? Which is paper? Vane smiled at that like he had all his teeth and knew how to use them. Bring them out, he said. I'll be gentle. You won't, Guillermo said, pleasant. We're going to have a conversation about trespass instead. Vane shook his head, poor priest, small man, and signalled. His men fanned. The yard turned into a place where math gets done in iron and bone. Jessie kissed Mara's forehead like a man who had learned humility the expensive way. If I fall, he said, I will pick you up, she answered. And if I fall, I will throw my life at the hole until it fills. They didn't run, they didn't hide. They stepped into the yard with Guillermo and Tom, who had found them again as if decency were a compass and he'd finally learned to trust its needle, and a half-dozen parishioners whose sins were none of Vane's business, but whose courage might be. Women with rolling pins, men with hands that knew work, a boy with a slingshot who looked like Eli if Eli had been born in town. Vane saw them and laughed the way a man does when he doesn't know what he's looking at yet. You think this is a stage? He asked. You think you can make me look small with an audience? You make yourself, Mara said, voice not loud, but made of a material the wind couldn't chew through. I just hold up the mirror. Jessie felt pride sit down beside fear in his chest and make room for it. That's when he became someone he had not planned to be and had always hoped to end up anyway. Vane nodded to Hogue, who had ridden with him again, because men in small towns have to pick a side and then live with it. Hogue didn't move. Judge's papers, Vane prompted. Hogue didn't reach into his coat. He reached instead into the pocket of the man he had meant to be years ago and had misplaced. No, he said, we do this wrong, and it'll talk about us longer than we'll live. Vane's lip lifted. You're tired of your pay, Marshal. I'm tired of your face, Hogue said, very polite. One of Vane's men drew. Tom moved before thinking could ruin the motion. He kicked a bucket that had collected the last rain, sent it into the man's knees. The shot went wild and chipped a saint's painted finger that had been pointing toward heaven for 60 years. Guillermo winced like he'd been cut and then smiled because even saints get to stop pointing sometimes. Everything that came next was quick. Jessie went left because he always goes where a right-handed man doesn't expect. He shouldered a rider off his horse. The horse switched sides in the argument and left. Mara snatched the fallen man's revolver and, with hands steadier than history, aimed not for skull, but for hat. The brim leapt, and the shot made a noise like a letter being opened, and the man discovered that fear tastes very like humility. Guillermo rang the cracked bell with a hammer, and the sound brought kids and dogs and old women leaning on canes out of the houses around the mission as if they'd been practicing for just this call. Hogue and Vane stared at each other over 15 feet of ground that had decided it was neutral territory and resented the assignment. Vane drew. Jessie saw it. He went where the bullet meant to go. It caught him in the shoulder he didn't need to be a door and spun him half around. He kept his feet because he had promised a woman he would. Jessie! Mara's voice found him as if it had been trained to. She moved to him and away from him in the same motion, wanting to hold, needing to fight. "Stay up." "Always," he lied. Tom dragged a trough into the line of fire and turned it into a barricade that would later water flowers when no one remembered what else it had done. Og lunged for Vane and knocked his pistol aside, as if suddenly deciding that his badge had a weight again. They grappled like men who had wrestled each other in haylofts when they were 15 and hadn't confessed it. Vane's boot slipped in the puddle the bucket had left. He fell. The town watched a man they'd called Mr. Land, like a sack of seed that had rotted before it was planted. "Enough!" Guillermo boomed, which was ridiculous because he was not a booming man. But some words borrow thunder when they need it. Silence held. Jesse put his unhurt arm around Mara, because poetry is wasted when the woman you love is bleeding and the man you mean to stop is making choices with a gun. "Silas," he said, breathing hard, voice ragged with truth, "we'll leave. We'll go past the county line. You'll tell a story about how you tired of the fight. You'll keep your money. We'll keep our names." Vane's eyes gathered cruelty, the way a storm gathers static. "You think I let you be a legend?" "I don't want legend," Jesse said. "I want a porch. I want to fix a fence that breaks every spring and cuss about it and fix it again. I want to sleep and not count the footsteps outside my door." He swallowed. "I want to live as her husband." Mara's hand found his and squeezed once. The yard paid attention to that squeeze. Vane's mouth twisted around his next line. It wasn't clever. "You won't get a porch," he said. "You'll get a pine box." Everyone saw it at the same time. His right hand wasn't empty. It held a derringer small enough to hide under a lie. It came up steady. It aimed not at Jesse, but at Mara's heart. 2 fingers squeezed, a habit practiced. The world narrowed like a choke. Jesse moved without thinking because thinking gets you killed when love is the only math left. He stepped into the bullet. It hit him under the collarbone, hot and final, and then not final because he chose to move after the world said stop. He caught Vane's wrist and drove it down into rock until bone complained. The derringer popped a second shot into dirt that would later grow grass purely to show it could. Hogue piled on, and suddenly Silas Vane, accountant of pain, had a ledger full of names he'd never bothered to write, and all of them were collecting. Jesse fell. Mara knelt and pressed her palm over the wound in a way that said she'd done this before to a calf torn on wire and had healed it with meat and prayer. "Stay," she told his blood. "Stay." "I like it when you order me," Jesse said, and then coughed because jokes don't keep you conscious. "You're a fool," she snapped, furious that men think sacrifice is always best spent in their own bodies. "Correct," he said. "I would like to practice it less often." Guillermo stood over Vane with the hammer like a scepter and announced to the yard, "Silas is going to jail." "City jail?" a man asked, incredulous. "Church jail," Guillermo said. "That a thing?" Tom asked. "It is, when I say it is," Guillermo replied, and something about the way he said it made even the goats nod. Hogue bound Vane's hands. The judge waddled in, late, face pink from being dragged out of his comfort toward a story that no longer centered him. He started to bluster precedent and writ, and Guillermo suggested he might like to consider penance instead. The judge shut his mouth, a miracle right there in the yard, where everyone could see it. They carried Jesse into the kitchen and set him on sacks of flour again, because life likes symmetry. Guillermo's hands were deft. Mara's were faster. Together they threaded a needle through skin and sin and made both think about behaving. Jesse let the world dim and then brighten, and then he held on to the little noises Mara made when she forgot other ears existed, the ones that sounded like forgiveness practicing. Night fell loud and long. The mission bell glowed in the starlight like a tooth no one had fixed because it made the face real. Tom sat the door again. Leda slept on a bench like a woman waiting to wake into something she had already chosen to believe. Hogue wrote a report in the corner and then tore it in half because it told the truth about the wrong man, and he was tired. Near midnight, Guillermo coughed a suggestion. "I could say words," he offered, eyes kind. Mara looked at Jessie. He looked back the way men do when they're a little high on pain and a little drunk on the idea that the right choice might be worth it. "I'm not dressed for it," he muttered. "You're dressed to be alive," Mara said. "We'll do the rest later." Guillermo smiled like a man looking at bread he'd worked hard for. "Repeat after me," he said, and kept it simple because the best vows are stubborn, not fancy. "I want to live as your wife," Mara said at the end, voice not trembling. "I want to live," Jessie said and swallowed, "and be worth it." They kissed the way people kiss when they've learned that mouths can heal as well as hurt. It wasn't long. It was true. In the morning, the town didn't wake so much as decide not to pretend it had been asleep. Vane was under lock in the sacristy, with a window exactly big enough to allow humility and too small to invite escape. The judge discovered precedent for not being a fool. Paper rearranged itself into justice for once, like a wagon wriggles back onto a rutted road and pretends it meant to do that. Hogue took off his badge and put it back on. Tom shod 2 horses for free and said nothing about it. The boy with the slingshot carved the saint a new finger from mesquite, and Guillermo let him tack it on crooked, because saints have a sense of humor other people suspect but can't prove. Jessie healed the way men heal when women insist. Slow, surly, then quick at the end. He made a list of things he owed the world and started paying in fence posts and wells cleaned and goats mended and doors fixed. Spring didn't so much arrive as barge in. The river swelled and then remembered where it lived. The Cottonwoods put on new clothes without asking anyone's opinion. Vane's men drifted like smoke you pretend isn't there until it stops being there. Vane himself learned to hate bread in a room that smelled like flour and forgiveness until the circuit court, with a judge who'd learned a thing, put him where his wall couldn't hear him curse. Jessie and Mara took Leda's spare room until their own walls learned to stand without supervision. They bought a window for the east wall because morning insisted. They planted beans where the soil promised not to hold grudges. They argued kindly and sometimes not, and they always found each other's hands afterward because that's what hands are for. Eli came back dusty and taller. He stood on their step with eyes that had seen the ocean and decided a river would do. He hugged his sister with both arms and his reserves. He hugged Jessie like a boy who wants to make a man understand his worth without being weird about it. "I ain't ever wearing a rope again," he said, and Jessie said good, because some promises don't need poetry. One summer evening, they took a blanket to the river bend where the water talked to itself in little clicks like a woman counting stitch. The sky practiced being purple. Eli skipped stones and pretended the third one had been on purpose. Tom rode up and tied his horse to a cottonwood and didn't say much because being alive near other people eventually teaches you that conversation can be a shared silence. Mara rested her head on Jessie's shoulder and traced the scar under his collarbone through his shirt, like it spelled a word only she knew how to pronounce. "Does it ache?" she asked. "When it rains," he said. "When you laugh too hard at my joke and I think maybe I'm suddenly very funny." "You are," she said, deadpan. "You're a liar," he said, adoring her for it. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not now." They watched the river wear the day away, calm and greedy the way good things are when you let them be. The child they hadn't told anybody about yet made a small fuss under Mara's palm and then settled, as if agreeing to wait to introduce himself to the world, until the frogs started their evening committees. Jessie put his hand over hers, and they learned the shape together. They didn't make speeches. They didn't need to. The wind went soft, the light turned to ribbons and slipped under the water to be remembered later. Together they watched the river slip under dusk, stars beginning to practice being brave. If this tale sat with you like a warm tin mug in cold hands, if it felt like a door held open, a quiet yes in a loud yard, subscribe for more frontier romances where love chooses, sacrifices, and builds a life that keeps choosing, one fence post, one vow, one dawn at a time.